Kate put on her jacket and started the lonely walk to the next studio, the next producer that her label thought would pull a hit song out of her. It'd been a year since she signed her record deal, 2 years since she met the guy who got it all started, but on that long walk, she couldn't keep away the thoughts that it might never happen for her. She knew her songs were good. They were. She believed in them. She knew she had something to say, but what if no one else ever heard it? So she pulled her jacket tighter around her, lowered her head, and pushed through the cold city. Someone would have to listen to her. Her songs were too good to be ignored. So she kept walking that lonely road that led straight into the history books. This is the story of Kate Bush. I'll be honest, I'm only really making this video because I'm in the middle of rewatching Stranger Things, and if you know anything about that show, you'll know that Kate Bush is kind of like the soundtrack to the 4th season. So once I was doing the Outcast video and I was talking about Big Boy's love for Kate Bush, it really made me want to know more about her and her music, since I had never really listened to her all that much. So here we are. If you end up enjoying this video, please consider giving it a like. And if you want to come alongside me as I'm doing my best to learn more about music history, then please consider subscribing. It's free to do. You can always unsubscribe. I also have memberships open if you want early access to videos, a more direct impact on what I cover here, and access to some, not many, but some members-only content. Catherine Bush was born in Kent in 1985 and raised in a small village outside of London. Her father was English and her mother was Irish, so she described always being on the border of those two distinct cultural identities. Her family was pretty musical. Her father played piano and her mother was an Irish folk dancer who was always playing Irish music around the house. And talking about that Irish music that her mother would play around the house a lot, Kate explained, "I think when you are really young, things get in deeper because you haven't got as many walls up. It's just emotional stuff. I think I was really lucky to be given that kind of stimulus. It's really heavy emotionally. The pipes, they really tear it out of your heart." It was always a very close-knit family, and her 2 older brothers, who were artists in their own right, would be a pretty integral part to different aspects of her career in the future. Despite that kind of musical upbringing and background, both of her parents worked in the medical field. Her father was a doctor and her mother was a nurse, though eventually her mother would kind of step in to be her father's assistant, answering calls and mail and that kind of stuff. But she did describe her mother as her muse once, and she was also very inspired by her father. They were very tight, close family. She talked about her close family saying, "I think I am most definitely a strongly emotionally based person, and my family are totally integral, I think, to everything I do. They affect me because I love them." She went to a convent school, which she found very exciting at first, at least. She said her first strong musical memory was hearing the Rolling Stones, which would have been around the age of 6. She remembered hearing Little Red Rooster in the car and being surprised that it wasn't perfect, for lack of a better word. They were singing slightly out of tune and differently than the polished pop sounds, and she thought that that style of singing brought way more emotion out of it, and that was really intriguing to her. Through her older brothers and their music, she was introduced to more of the late 60s rock and roll era. But at that point, she explained that her and her older brother were way more interested in that English folk revival music that was also happening, though just by virtue of being in school and owning a radio, she was around pop music and some of that got in as well. So it was kind of this mix of the English folk and pop music. And she said that her brothers would host these music nights and invite friends around who would be playing folk music in their home. And she said about growing up surrounded by all this different music, "I think the music that I was hearing at a very early age influenced me tremendously because before I was going to school, before I was reading, I was singing along to songs, to traditional music. And in a way, I think that got my soul before the education even got near me." It was at these folk nights that her brothers hosted where she first started performing, for lack of a better word. Her brother explained that it was mostly like Victorian sea shanties that were probably not appropriate for a child to be singing, but she would still sing along and sing with the band. And she said that as a child, she was pretty extroverted. She would dance along to the music on the television, but as she got into school, that kind of shifted and she became way more shy and reclusive. She also said that while she was singing at these folk meetings and these folk hangouts, that she never really considered that as a career. She didn't think that was something to do. It was just kind of a natural thing. Everyone else was playing music, everyone around her and her family were doing it, so it just kind of made sense that she would step in and be a part of that without really thinking it would turn into anything. So as she got older, this extroverted, outgoing identity started to shift, and she described her teenage years as very lonely, which led her to start writing poems and stuff. She explained, I became very shy at school. It laid some very heavy inhibitions on me. I wasn't exactly bullied, but there were people who picked on me and gave me a very hard time. I was very thin and younger than most in my class, so I was rather like the runt of the litter. I'd get hit occasionally, but nothing that heavy, and I never fought back. I will say that there is some debate and some speculation on whether or not that quote I just read is authentic. It was in a magazine where it claimed it was written by her, but in the very first sentence, it got her birthday completely wrong. So there's some debate there, but that sentiment of being very lonely has cropped up in several different interviews that I've read and watched. She explained that she saw her piano as like her only friend. So I think that sentiment is authentic, even if that quote isn't. In school, she studied violin and piano and would start to record some of her own songs on a reel-to-reel tape machine. A family friend with music industry connections tried to get her a publishing deal since she considered herself more of a songwriter than a performer, but publishers all thought her songs were too morbid and not commercial enough. So she started to think about other career paths, notably psychiatry. Then when she was 15 or 16, one of those demo tapes that she recorded ended up in the hands of David Gilmour, the guitarist of Pink Floyd. Apparently, one of Kate's brothers had a friend named Ricky Hopper who was friends with David Gilmour through his time at Cambridge. Even though she was still so young, David immediately recognized something in her and wanted to get her music out there. He saw something special even when no one else really did. He went to her parents' house to meet her and she played him a ton of songs that she had recorded onto tape. Even though it wasn't something he normally did, he thought that he needed to do something with this talent. And at the time, he was working on Dark Side of the Moon, so he was a little busy, but he still found time to set her up in a studio and start recording more professional demos. He explained,
When we started her off, I put her together with an engineer and a producer and an arranger and a top studio, and I chose the songs out of, she had about 40 or 50 songs, and I picked 3, and I had this friend of mine who was a arranger producer, and I gave him the songs and said, listen, get this all fixed up, take her in the studio and do these songs as masters, not as demos.
He took those songs to EMI. I think that was his label. I didn't look that up, but it makes sense that he would take the songs to his label instead of a different one. I'm not sure, but he took them to EMI and they said that they wanted them, but then for a couple years, they didn't release anything. They were just kind of sitting on stuff. So that led to rumors and speculation that they were holding Kate back until she was older and more mature because it fit better with the sound or something. She met David in 1974, got signed in 1976, and her debut album didn't come out in 1978, just to give some perspective on the length of time we're talking about here. In the meantime, Kate left school and focused on dance because she thought it was another good way to express her creativity and to kind of accompany the songs and the stories she was writing. She used the advance that EMI gave her when she signed to enroll in classes from the guy who taught David Bowie. She thought the dancing went hand in hand with her music, explaining, I really felt that I wanted to get some sort of bodily expression together to go with the music. Music is a very emotional thing, and there's always a message, and your purpose as a performer is to get it across to the people in as many ways as you can. But that story of them thinking Kate was too young and wanting to hold back until she was older and more mature is apparently not true. David explained that the reason it took so long was because the label kept putting her with other producers other than the guy that he hooked her up with, so they were just not getting anything out of the recording sessions. The songs weren't as good because the combination wasn't quite there. David encouraged them to just go back to the person he connected her with, and then things started rolling a little bit faster after that. But by that point, Kate was starting to get really frustrated and worried that she wasn't able to get her songs out to people. She started wondering if any of this was actually going to happen because it was just so long, and especially when you're that young, it's kind of hard to be patient in that way when you're so close. So it started to weigh on her a little bit. While waiting for the label to get their act together, she formed the KT Bush Band and performed around London. That band was really only active for a few months in 1977, but they managed to get a pretty decent sized following playing the different clubs around the town, and they played many of Kate's songs before they were on that debut album. It also let her get her feet wet performing for larger audiences, something that was pretty scary for her at first, but through through playing in the KT Bush band, she was able to understand the dynamics of performing in front of a crowd. Finally, her debut album, The Kick Inside, came out in 1978. Going against the label's wishes, she chose Wuthering Heights as the lead single, which was the correct decision because it hit #1 in the UK and caused the album to peak at #3. It was the first song written and performed by a female artist to ever hit #1 in the UK charts. The other singles were also a success, with one charting in the US as well. And that sudden success was super exciting and thrilling to her, as it would be for anyone. She said, "I think it's wonderful actually how warmly I was received by the English people, and I think especially then because there was very little going on with the female artist. For instance, at that time, there was probably only Blondie and myself that were sort of happening. So yes, I was very surprised at the way I was accepted and very, very grateful for it." Sensing the commercial opportunity of Kate Bush, EMI rushed out a follow-up album in the same year, Lionheart, which Kate has since said that she is not as satisfied with. It was another commercial hit though, but it didn't quite reach the same heights as her debut. She recorded it in France, and she thought that brought a different element to the album that she enjoyed, but it was probably just too rushed for her. She explained that the writing had to be sped up in order to meet the label's deadline, and that was something that she wasn't really all that happy with. She said, "It was a difficult situation because there was very little time around, and I felt very squashed in by the lack of time, and that's what I don't like, especially if it's concerning something as important for me as my songs are. They're really important to me." In 1979, she embarked on her first ever major tour, which was this massive theatrical enterprise. It wasn't just a musical tour. There was going to be magic shows and burlesque and just these grand sets. Her brother and members of the KT Bush band were going out with her. The label was a little bit concerned with how much the spectacle would cost, and with no previous tours to gauge if she would be a big audience draw, they wouldn't cover the cost fully. So Kate paid for half of it, with EMI picking up the rest. But during a smaller warm-up show to kind of rehearse the full thing and iron out any kinks, a young, promising lighting director named Bill Duffield fell and suffered injuries that he would die from a week later. Understandably, that put a damper cloud over the entire tour and probably sullied her attitude toward touring for the rest of her career. Even though that tour was a pretty big success, it would be the only tour of her prime career. She never toured again. She never really explained why she stopped touring, but the closest she got was saying, "I need 5 months to prepare a show and build up my strength for it, and in those 5 months, I can't be writing new songs and I can't be promoting the album." Since songwriting was her primary outlet and the thing that she felt was most important, it makes sense that she would want to focus on that, especially since she was super involved in creatively planning the tour. I'm sure the prospect of doing that again was very daunting, not to mention how Bill's death must have affected her. She said often how much that tour took out of her, just the planning and the rehearsing and being involved in every little detail. It was just so much, and I can imagine not wanting to do that again, honestly. But then she thought, I could do a toned down version, but that's not as appealing to her. She kind of wants it to be the spectacle, so I get why it just never really happened again. For her third album, Never Forever, released in 1980, she tried her hand at producing. She had also met Peter Gabriel from the band Genesis, who introduced her to making music using electronic instruments. So this album had a drum machine and synthesizers. It was the first album from a female artist to hit #1. And she said that Never Forever was the first album that she could hand over to people with a smile, seemingly implying that it was the first one she was completely pleased with. But it also made her very tired, like she felt after the tour, when she felt like she'd given everything and her creative battery was drained. She struggled to write anything new for a bit, but out of that rest came a new element to her music. She said that she felt like her music needed a shock, and she got that before releasing her next album. That next album, 1982's The Dreaming, was the first album that she produced entirely herself. It was a different sound for her. She said it was more rhythmic and she was using different instruments than she was used to. It was a longer recording process, and she said it felt like putting a jigsaw together at times, mostly because she was doing things very differently, so it was trying to figure out how all of it worked. It took a year to record at various studios that had the equipment that she was looking for. She also said during the promo of this album that she thought she was ready to go back on tour again. She said that she wanted 2 albums worth of material before she thought about another tour, but then thinking about it, she realized that she was kind of out of shape from working on the album. She wasn't in the best dancing and performing shape, so she needed time to get back into that mode, and then, of course, we all know that didn't end up happening. Not the getting in shape part, she probably did that. The tour didn't end up happening, is what I meant. Critics didn't love this album. It was very experimental and non-commercial. She joked joked that people thought she'd gone crazy, but I think it was super important for her to have this experiment before starting in on what would become her most iconic album. She said about writing The Dreaming, "As soon as I wrote the songs, I realized that it was very different, and all the time I do very much want to change my art. And I do actually think that the direction I'm going in is away from the commercial. Well, the obvious commercial." All of this experimentation and musical growth and focus on the writing and the songs resulted in 1985's Hounds of Love, which is considered by many people one of the best albums ever made. Before making Hounds of Love, she kind of retreated from the public eye for a bit. She wasn't promoting anything and just working on new music, so she was able to step away. Plus, The Dreaming wasn't very successful, so people didn't care about her as much as they did when she was a hit artist, letting her be somewhat invisible for a bit. She said that this mini break helped her realize what was really important, which was her songs and not the associated fame. It was a mental reset for her. She again self-produced Hounds of Love, and it was a pretty quick commercial and critical success. After The Dreaming didn't perform all that well, this was like Kate stepping back into the limelight. The single Running Up That Hill initially did pretty well, but it became her second #1 single in 2022 when Stranger Things used it as a key song in season 4. Before recording this album, Kate and her partner Del, who was the bassist in the KT Bush band and he had stuck with her since, moved out of the city into a farmhouse where she got to spend time gardening and building her own home studio. In that studio, she was able to blend her love for these new computer-based sounds and instruments with the traditional folk revival music that she and her brother loved. Since it was her own home studio, she got to take her time and really develop the sound. The album really exists as two sides, with the front half being more conventional pop music and the latter half being more experimental. Rolling Stone said that it was meant to encapsulate the difference between night and day, but I don't know if that's something Kate said and described, or if that's just Rolling Stone trying to be poetic. At the time of its release and later, Kate has called it the album that she is the most happy with. But once again, she didn't tour the album. She even found it kind of difficult to do media promotion for it, which led to her getting this reputation as mysterious and private. She explained, "We do work in a very isolated way, most of the time it's just the three of us in the control room, the engineer, Del, and myself, say. And then suddenly to go out into the world to do promotion is quite a culture shock. There are really a lot of people out there, and to walk into a room with perhaps a few hundred people in it and they are all looking at you is a very different world. It is all a bit unreal. It tends to get a bit scary sometimes." And she said about the fame that was a natural result of her having hit songs, quote, "It's healthier for me not to indulge in being a famous person. It's ridiculous. There's absolutely no reason why I should be at all other than that I make records. I find it extraordinary that people should want to write about me when I do so little. I just pop out and do an album and go away again." In typical Kate fashion, she took 4 years to work on new music, finally releasing The Sensual World in 1989. EMI did release a greatest hits compilation in 1986 to tide fans over while they were waiting. She said that she started feeling overwhelmed by all of the equipment in her home studio, and she wanted to focus more on the song as the most important thing, again, not these kind of computer-based components. She wrote most of the songs on piano first, which she thought gave them a different feel than her past couple of albums, and she's called The Sensual World her most honest and personal album. Again, after taking several years in between albums, something that she definitely enjoyed that she had the freedom to do, she released The Red Shoes in 1993, which again was a different direction. It was based on a movie and it was released with a short film that Kate made called The Line, the Cross, and the Curve. It was also her first album to have a bunch of guest musicians on it instead of just her. The Red Shoes came out in the midst of a lot of personal turmoil. Her mother passed away the year before it came out, and her longtime relationship with Del was wearing down. Before the breakup, Kate explained their relationship and close working partnership this way. "My relationship with Del is very stable. We work together, we live together, it works so well for us. That can be a very intense setup, but I wouldn't have it any other way. It's all very close and direct." So with that relationship breaking down, as well as the personal drama associated with it, I'm sure it threw her career into a little bit of turmoil as well. Del was her right-hand man. He was a self-taught engineer who was the other primary voice in the sound of all of her albums. I mean, he wasn't singing, but you know what I mean by musical voice. So I'm sure it was kind of confusing about like, how are we going to work together after this? Is it still going to work? Is the dynamic going to be there? With all of that, Kate said that she was feeling really tired and she was ready to go away for a while and worry about pleasing no one but herself, which she did. After the Red Shoes, she took a 12-year hiatus before doing anything else in music. She planned on only taking a year or so off, but that kept stretching. While she was away, she kept picking up awards and had a child with guitarist Dan McIntosh. Of course, rumors kept spreading about her because she was so far out of the public eye and no one really knew what she was up to. As far as I can tell, she's never thoroughly explained why she took so much time off, but it makes sense to me. She's always seemed kind of hesitant to be a famous person. That fame and attention she was always wary of, and it made her weary. So she just wanted to be away from it for a bit, especially with a new son that she was focusing her time on and trying to raise this child. It makes sense that she didn't really want those worlds to meet much. Other people have speculated that she could tell her voice was waning and weakening, and she didn't want to ruin her reputation by putting out more music or doing more tours where her voice wasn't top notch, but I don't know how much stock I put in that theory, honestly. In 2005, she returned with another album and then slipped away again until 2011 with her 10th studio album. And then in 2014, she started a 22-night residency in London that sold out like instantly. Since then, she's been on and off, but still likes to maintain her privacy and is still out there making music. That's the story of Kate Bush, someone who really appreciated and understood the power of a song. And that's something that I really love about her and her music, how seriously she took the act of just making a song. Let me know what you think. Use the comments below. Tell me what I missed in this video. I'm sure there's a lot, especially towards the end of her career. I tend to focus on the early part of artists' careers, so there's a lot I missed in the back part. Leave all that in the comment below. If you ended up liking the video, consider dropping it a like, subscribe if you want more of these stories from music history, and I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to the members of this channel, the people who understand what I'm trying to do here and want to partner with me and come alongside me to help me with that. So thank you so much.